It's VE week, and I thought what better way to celebrate the achievements of the greatest generation than to make a wooden flag to show how happy and how proud I am of what they managed to give us. As always with my build, something didn't go to plan. I tried to simplify the process and in the end made it harder. But stick with me to the end and I'll show you what you can do to make this a dead simple build and something that you'll be able to keep forever. And here we start with why I've overcomplicated this so much. Instead of just measuring the width for all these pieces of wood, gluing them together and then cutting one lot at an angle, I decided I'd use my laser to make individual parts that I could use as templates. In my head, this made things so much simpler. The reality was that gluing lots of small parts with angles is really tricky. So far for this build, I've got some oak and I've got some mango, and I'm going to have to try source some other scrap material that I can use to create the contrasting colours that I need for this build. The best place I can think to find this is going to be in my little hardwood scraps box. Let's have a look at what we can find. So into the mix now, I've managed to add some maple and also some walnut. I've got all the pieces that I need. Everything should contrast nicely. Let's start milling this lumber up and get it to the dimensions that we need. I thought this would be a great time to talk about my family's experience of World War II. Now, it obviously predates me, but I remember growing up with stories from my grandparents around how they had served. Whilst it was always scant on details due to our young age, I know a few things for sure. My grandfather, he served in North Africa, being stationed in Egypt primarily, before moving out to Burma. My grandma also started in Egypt and later became a code breaker, an often forgotten part of the war effort. So back to the build now, and I'm using the templates that I made earlier to mark out all the different pieces I'm going to need. I found here that a red pen works really well on walnuts and other dark woods. With our marks made, it's time to trim down yet again over on the table saw. A couple of quick passes has all the lengths at the right size that we need once more. Over on the chop saw, I've got a shadow line that helps me line up all my pieces. This was a little bit finicky and it took 2 or 3 goes to get everything lined up how it needed to be, but because the angles were always repeatable after that, once it was set, I could leave it where it was. So with the oak and walnut cut, it's starting to take shape, just the maple to go. And for this, the process was exactly the same as before. And with the maple strips complete, it's time to see how this is all going to sit together. Now I've got to say, this is one part of the build that I did find rather tricky. Some people love repeatable cuts. You can set it up and cut again and again. Unfortunately, I've got the attention span of a squirrel. So making 40 odd cuts, all at similar angles, bored me to tears. But it was a process well worth it when things come together later on in the build. So it's time to make a quick right angle jig, and I'm going to glue everything up in smaller sections. That way I should retain some level of control over how these pieces glue together. With this jig only needing to last a couple of hours, CA glue's plenty strong enough for this. If I was to make a bunch of these together, I'd also look at screwing it in from the back just to add some extra stability. And after putting a small dab of glue on each piece, it's time to clamp it up. Using this right angled jig really helped to attach the clamps to and keep everything square. Now the first set of clamps I put on was a little bit fiddly, but once I'd figured out the orientation, the other 4 went on dead easy. So whilst this build's progressing on nicely, I thought it were a good time just to look back and think a little bit about what VE Day meant to those in Britain as it happened 80 years ago. This is possibly the biggest and best street party that's ever been had. Can you imagine having 6 years of restrictions, 6 years of war, and for that all to be over and the emotion of it all spill out into the streets, especially around places like Buckingham Palace where there was hundreds of thousands of people gathering to celebrate as a group. Once the glue's set, I square off the 2 inner edges, leaving the outside edges slightly longer. I I can always come back later and trim these off a bit. And as I get more sections complete, the puzzle seems to grow. Eventually I'll get this into 2 halves that I can then glue together to make one final piece. As you can see from the left hand side, there are tons of little bits of template everywhere. Trying to put this thing together was one of the most stressful glue ups I've ever done, and I seem to say that with every glue up. The problem I had was I knocked over the camera halfway through, so I've lost all the footage of it. So once we're out of the clamps for the final time, it's time to start trimming away. A flush trim saw really helped on the first bit, and once I was thin enough to go through the planer, I've glued the life out of this thing. Now I know putting multi-directional grain patterns through a planer is a point of hot topic within the woodworking world, so I made sure to take really shallow passes and I put a sacrificial piece on the end to make sure that I didn't have any snipe. Whilst I love how smooth the planer makes things, it also shows up the small imperfections in the glue up. So it's time for that age-old trick, dab a little bit of glue into the gap and sand over the top to fill any holes that are left. After that, it's time to square up over on the table saw, and this is where my camera skills come into their own. I have got a beautiful shot of the back of my head and a complete blurred image of the flag getting trimmed. Just think, 80 years ago they'd have left me in charge of explosives or a gun. What could have gone wrong there then? A quick check of square and I am absolutely amazed that this is bob on square. That doesn't happen often with me. I said right at the beginning I would tell you how you could make this process even easier. And quite simply, it's to do something like this, to get all the pieces glued up first in strips and then cut the angles across them, instead of trying to cut out multiple small pieces and glue them back together later. That would have made this job so much easier and a lot smoother. So it's time to add a little bit of finish. Check those final cuts. Make sure everything's polished the way that I want it to be, because this thing is pretty much done. And there we go guys, the finished article. I'm absolutely made up with this. It's come out brilliantly. I'd like to thank you for watching. It's really appreciated. If you've got some value out of this video, I'd love you to hit that subscribe or like button. It really helps a small channel out like mine. And until next time, have a good time in your workshop.